Welcome to the story. Don't forget to like, subscribe and support me. The Xiphon came without warning, their ships blotting out the skies like storm clouds. People across the globe froze in awe, watching the gleaming alien crafts hover silently above cities and countrysides alike. There was no time to react, no chance to prepare for the horror that followed. In a matter of days, world governments collapsed, military defenses fell, and humanity's spirit was crushed under the weight of a power it had never known. The invaders were not like anything the world had ever encountered. The Xiphon didn't rely on weapons of destruction and no bombs, no guns, no advanced technology that could be countered or resisted. Their strength lay in their minds. The moment they landed, their invisible force took hold, sweeping over human populations like a suffocating fog. Minds bent, wills shattered, and people everywhere became slaves to the Xiphon's will. From powerful leaders to the everyday man on the street, no one could resist. There was no fighting back. No resistance seemed possible. Dr. Evelyn Moore was among the few who witnessed the first wave of control with a cold, detached horror. As a neuroscientist, she had always been fascinated by the capabilities of the human brain, its potential for both brilliance and destruction. Yet even in her wildest theories, she could never have imagined a force like this. Watching the news feeds from her lab, she saw entire cities fall under Xiphon control, the population moving like puppets as their mental strings were pulled by an unseen force. Her colleagues in the scientific community were as helpless as the generals in their war rooms staring at the screens, knowing there was nothing they could do. Evelyn's phone buzzed on the desk, interrupting her thoughts. It was General Marcus Fields, one of the few military leaders still holding out. His voice, once strong and commanding, now carried a wariness that chilled her. "Dr. Moore, we need your help. If there's anything at all you can think of." "We're out of options." She hesitated. She had spent the last few days combing through data, analyzing what little information they had on the Xiphon's abilities. But how could they combat something as intangible as mind control? The thought gnawed at her mind, leaving her with a sense of futility. "I'm trying, General. But this isn't like anything we've ever seen. Their control, it's not just psychological. It's something deeper." "We need a miracle, Doctor," Fields said, his voice edged with desperation. "Otherwise, we're done for." After the call, Evelyn sat back in her chair, her eyes drawn to the window where the faint outline of a Xiphon ship floated on the horizon. For the first time in her life, she felt truly powerless. What good was all her knowledge, all the advancements humanity had made, when their greatest strength, their minds, could be twisted and controlled so easily? It wasn't long before she heard whispers of a man who could resist the Xiphon's power. At first, it was just rumors passed through the remnants of the resistance, spoken in hushed tones. People talked about a mysterious figure who seemed immune to the aliens' influence, someone who wandered from city to city, untouched by the mind control that had enslaved the rest of the population. Most dismissed the stories as superstition, the desperate grasping at any hope in the face of overwhelming despair. But Evelyn couldn't ignore it. She needed to know if there was any truth to the claims, no matter how impossible they sounded. After weeks of searching, she finally found him. Xavier was not what she expected. He was younger than the stories suggested, perhaps in his mid-30s, with a calm, serene presence that immediately set him apart from the panic-stricken survivors who still roam the countryside. His clothes were simple, his demeanor quiet, but there was something about the way he carried himself, an unshakable confidence, a sense of peace that made Evelyn uneasy. "You're Dr. Moore," he said, as if he'd been waiting for her all along. "I've heard about you." Evelyn frowned, unsure of how to proceed. "People say you can resist them." "The Xiphon." Xavier nodded, his gaze steady. "It's true. How?" The question escaped her lips before she could stop herself. She had to know. "How are you able to resist them when no one else can?" Xavier studied her for a long moment, his eyes calm but intense. "The Xiphon control minds through fear, through doubt. They prey on the weakest parts of USA, the places where we don't believe in ourselves, where we've been conditioned to feel powerless. But the human mind is far more powerful than they realize. We've just never tapped into its full potential. Evelyn blinked, caught off guard by his words. What are you talking about? I've studied the brain my entire life. I know its limits. You know its limits in the physical world, Xavier said gently. But the mind is not just a collection of neurons and synapses. It's something greater. Our consciousness, our spirit has capabilities that go beyond what science can measure. The Xiphon can't control those who've awakened their true mental power, and neither can anyone else. Evelyn opened her mouth to protest, to tell him that what he was saying sounded like mysticism, not science, but she stopped herself. Something in his voice, in the calm certainty with which he spoke, made her pause. Could it be true? Could there be a part of the human mind that had remained dormant all this time, waiting to be awakened? Xavier continued, his voice low but steady. The Xiphon's power isn't invincible. It's built on the assumption that we are weak, that we can't resist. But we can. We just need to learn how. The resistance had been holding out, barely surviving on the fringes of society, scraping together what little resources they had left. General Fields was one of the last to believe in any kind of solution outside of brute force, and even he had to admit that conventional tactics had failed them at every turn. The Xiphon were simply too strong, their control too pervasive. No matter what they tried, their soldiers would fall under the aliens' control, turning against their own people, helpless puppets in a war they didn't understand. When Evelyn brought Xavier to the resistance space, she wasn't sure what to expect. Fields eyed him warily, his distrust of anything remotely spiritual clear in his scowl. Let me get this straight, he said, crossing his arms. You're telling me that the way to beat these aliens is by what? Meditating. Xavier didn't flinch at the skepticism in Fields' voice. It's not about meditation, it's about unlocking the power that's already within us. The Xiphon control us through our fears and doubts. They tap into the parts of our mind that are weakest. But we can strengthen those parts. We can take back control. Fields looked at Evelyn, clearly unconvinced. This is a joke, right? But Evelyn wasn't laughing. She had seen too much already to dismiss Xavier's words outright, and the more she listened, the more she began to believe that there might be something to what he was saying. We've tried everything else, General, she said quietly. What do we have to lose? Reluctantly, Fields agreed to let Xavier begin training a small group of volunteers. The process was slow, painstaking. The people who had agreed to undergo the training were desperate, their minds broken by weeks of fear and loss. But under Xavier's guidance, they began to change. It wasn't easy. The mental exercises were grueling, pushing them to confront their deepest insecurities, their greatest fears. But as they worked, something remarkable began to happen. A few weeks into the training, one of the volunteers, a man named Alexis, stood up during a routine drill and refused to follow an order given by one of the Xiphon's mind-controlled soldiers. At first, no one believed it. The Xiphon's control was absolute, or so they had thought. But Alex's mind had changed. He had found a way to block the Xiphon's influence, to shield his thoughts from their invasive mental probes. For the first time since the invasion began, a human had resisted the Xiphon's power. Word of Alex's success spread quickly, sparking a flicker of hope among the resistance. More people volunteered for the training, eager to reclaim their minds, their freedom. As more people experienced their own breakthroughs in resisting the Xiphon, the resistance began to shift. It was no longer about hiding in bunkers, hoping for some miraculous outside force to save them. Instead, they were learning to fight back in a way the Xiphon had not anticipated. Every new person who managed to block the alien mind control became a beacon of hope, and the movement spread faster than anyone could have imagined. Evelyn watched the transformation with a mixture of awe and skepticism. Though she had initially resisted the idea that the human mind could be this powerful, The evidence was undeniable. People who had once been under the Xiphon's control were breaking free, standing tall in defiance of the once unstoppable force. Even General Fields, who had been the most resistant to Xavier's methods, couldn't argue with the results. Still, Evelyn couldn't shake the nagging feeling that there was something they were missing. As more and more people awakened their mental powers, the Xiphon became more aggressive. Their attacks grew fiercer, their attempts at control more forceful. It was as if they knew they were losing their grip on humanity and were desperate to regain control. One evening, Evelyn cornered Xavier in the makeshift command center. The room buzzed with activity, soldiers and resistance members moving quickly as they planned their next operation. But Evelyn's focus was solely on Xavier. "I don't understand," she said, her voice low but intense. "If we're winning, if people are awakening to this power, why does it feel like the Xiphon are getting stronger?" Xavier leaned back against the wall, his expression calm, though his eyes were serious. "They're not getting stronger. They're desperate. They've relied on their mind control for so long, they don't know how to fight without it. But as more of us awaken, they're losing their advantage." Evelyn frowned, her mind racing. "But what if they find another way to control us? We've only just begun to understand this power. What if we're not strong enough?" Xavier looked at her for a long moment, then placed a hand on her shoulder. "Evelyn, the strength we're tapping into isn't about physical power or even mental ability. It's about belief. Belief in ourselves. The Xiphon can't take that from us. Not if we don't let them." His words lingered in her mind long after he left the room. Evelyn wanted to believe him. She wanted to believe that humanity's will was enough to drive the Xiphon away. But deep down, she still feared that their newfound strength might not be enough. The turning point came when the Xiphon launched an all-out assault on one of the largest remaining human settlements. It was clear they intended to crush the resistance once and for all. Their ships descended from the skies like birds of prey, and their soldiers, still under tight mental control, marched into the city with eerie precision. But this time, the resistance was ready. Evelyn stood on the front lines, her mind sharper than ever. She had undergone the training herself in secret, pushing her mental boundaries further than she had thought possible. Now, as the Xiphon forces approached, she felt the familiar tug at her into the cold, insidious pressure of their control. But this time, she resisted. All around her, people who had completed Xavier's training stood strong. Their minds, once vulnerable and easily manipulated, now glowed with an inner strength that the Xiphon couldn't penetrate. The aliens tried, sending waves of mental commands, but they were met with a wall of defiance. For the first time, the Xiphon faltered. Evelyn could see the confusion in the eyes of the mind-controlled human soldiers. They hesitated, unsure of their next move as the Xiphon's control over them weakened. And then, one by one, the soldiers began to break free. Some collapsed to their knees, disoriented and shaken, while others turned on their alien overlords, the rage of years of enslavement flooding back. The battle that followed was like nothing Evelyn had ever seen. It wasn't fought with guns or explosives, though there were plenty of those as well. It was fought in the minds of every person standing against the Xiphon. Waves of mental energy clashed in the air, invisible to the naked eye but felt by everyone. It was as if the very atmosphere pulsed with the intensity of the struggle. Evelyn focused her mind, reaching out to those around her, linking with them in a way she hadn't thought possible. Together, they formed a collective consciousness, a united force that pushed back against the Xiphon's control. She could feel the power of their combined will, growing stronger with each passing moment. The Xiphon, for all their advanced technology and mental prowess, had never faced anything like this. They had never imagined that humanity, a species they considered weak and primitive, could rise up and resist them in such a way. Their arrogance had been their downfall. Evelyn felt the moment the tide turned. It was like a dam breaking, a surge of energy flooding the battlefield as the Xiphon's control shattered. The alien soldiers staggered, their psychic grip slipping from the minds of the human fighters. And then, in a sudden, desperate retreat, the Xiphon ships began to lift off, fleeing the city they had once sought to dominate. The humans, free at last from their control, cheered as the last of the Xiphon ships disappeared into the sky. But the victory felt bittersweet. They had won the battle, but Evelyn knew the war was far from over. In the aftermath, as the city began to rebuild, she found Xavier sitting quietly on a hill overlooking the ruins. She approached him, the weight of the day heavy on her shoulders. "They'll come back," she said softly. "We may have pushed them out of the city, but they won't stop until they've regained control." Xavier nodded, his expression thoughtful. "You're right. But we've taken the first step. Humanity has awakened. And now that we've tasted freedom, we won't go back." Evelyn sat beside him, staring out at the horizon where the Xiphon ships had fled. "What happens next? How do we stop them for good?" Xavier's gaze was distant, as if he were looking beyond the physical world into something deeper. "We continue to grow. This awakening, it's just the beginning. The human mind is more powerful than we've ever realized. If we continue to unlock that power, there's nothing the Xiphon or any other force in the universe can do to stop us." Evelyn wasn't sure if she believed him, but in that moment, she wanted to. She wanted to believe that humanity's spirit was stronger than the cold, calculating control of the Xiphon. That even in the face of overwhelming odds, they could find a way to not just survive, but thrive. As the sun set over the battered city, Evelyn felt a flicker of hope. The battle has been won, but the real fight for humanity's future was just beginning.